If you have a new camera and want to take great photos like these, stay tuned. We're going to go through everything you need to know as a beginning photographer to create amazing photographs. Get ready, buckle up. We're going to find out about shutter speed, aperture, and much, much more in this episode with D2 Destinations. Hey guys, this is Den with D2 Destinations, and today we're going to go over a lot of the photographic basics so that you can shoot wonderful photographs from day one. Turn off that auto setting and use your shutter and your aperture to get great photos. This is really a great time in history to be a photographer or being interested in photography. Some of the things that you need to learn are the rule of thirds, your aperture settings, your shutter settings, and what ISO to use. So that's what we're going to talk about today, so you can get the best pictures possible from your new iPhone, interchangeable lens camera, or point and shoot. It all started back with one of these old cameras. Let me show you how this opened up. And oh my goodness, look at that. That's a roll of film. Okay, we're not even talking about that, but the basics of photography have not changed. And that's what we're going to cover today. No matter if you have an old camera, the newest iPhone, a point and shoot, or an interchangeable lens camera, today we're going to go over the photographic basics to make sure that you have great skills going forward. Once you learn the basics of these four things, your photographs are going to be so much better and your friends are going to love it. Now, the very first thing, the rule of thirds, it's all about composition in your photograph. Now, one of the greatest things you can do for yourself is just simply turn on the grid on your viewfinder. Once you turn the grid on your viewfinder, this is going to help you significantly. To turn on the grid for your camera on your iPhone, simply go into Settings, and then under your camera, you'll find the grid. Just turn that on. And then you will have the grid on your camera when you turn it on, as you can see here. And most people that begin, they just point and shoot, and their subject is right there. And that is not where you want your subject. The rule of thirds exists to point you in the right direction of where to put the main subject in your photograph. And that is on one of these corners right here. One of these intersections right there, right there, right there. So depending on what you're shooting, pretend it's a sunset. You may want the sun setting right there. You don't want the sun setting in the center. It's not as photogenically pleasing. So with your landscape format, basically holding your iPhone on its side or your camera in its normal position, this is what you're going to see. The best thing you can do is put your subject on one of the intersections of all of these lines. Depending on what type of shot you're taking, you can change where the subject is. Just make sure it's on one of these 4 points. That alone is going to extremely change how you're shooting and the result of the photograph that you're getting. Now, if you are taking photographs of people, people stand up this way. So instead of leaving your camera or your iPhone in the horizontal position, you simply want to change it to vertical. And once you change it to vertical, the best thing that you can do if you're taking a picture of a person is to put their eyes on this line right here. The top horizontal line is where you want their eyes to be. That will give you a great portrait. You don't want it down here. You don't want it way up here. If you can put the eyes on this level of your main subject when you shoot vertical, that's where it should be. Now, if you have trees or tall buildings or edges in there, you may want to put those on one of the vertical lines. If you're doing a field goal or whatever, you want your kicker right down here, and then you want each of these lines right here on the goalposts if possible for sports. There are many, many different scenarios, but the important thing to take away from the rule of thirds is putting your subject on one of these 4 points. And if you're shooting portraits, eyes on the top level. Today we're going to talk about taking your camera off of automatic and using the other functions. The first of which is going to be the AV, which is your aperture priority. This is aperture f1.8. This is aperture f16. 1.8 down to 16. That gives you a tremendous range determining the depth of field and the amount of light your lens is letting into the camera. And at f1.8 you get a very shallow focusing range using that particular aperture. Your focal range is going to be very shallow. If your camera's over here and you're shooting towards this subject, your focal position is going to be between these 2 black lines, so very, very narrow. Everything else out here is going to be out of focus. Everything way before that is going to be out of focus. But if you do what's called stop down, the next ring in is f2.8, which is still a very fast lens. That gives you a little more focal range than the f1.8. However, this still is very, very shallow, okay? If you want to do a landscape and get a lot more in focus, or if you're shooting a larger group of people and you have rows of people where people in front, a second row and a third row, you don't want to shoot with a narrow focus range. You're not going to get them all in focus. If you have people standing where the red is and where the blue is, and then you've got a third line back there, you may want to go f4 or actually 5, 6 or f8. But the point is, the f number that you see on your aperture setting, the bigger that number becomes, yes, the opening is smaller, but the amount of focal range that you have is much greater. And if you're going to do a landscape or something like that, you want to go all the way out to f11 or f16. It's a small opening, but it has the largest focal range. So if you're shooting at f11, your camera's over here, everything from a little in front of it all the way out to here is going to be fully in focus. That's the way aperture works. So remember, f1.8, think of that as feet of focus. So you got 1.8 feet right here. If your camera's over here, this one person is going to be in focus, and that's about it. Okay? If you go up to f4, you're going to have about 4 feet of focus, a little in front and several feet behind. If you go out to f11, it's going to be more than 11 feet, but you're going to have like 11 feet on this scale of focus between here and here. Anything in that range will be in focus. So I hope that helps explain aperture for you. I know it's a rudimentary drawing, but that's one of the best ways to think about it. The small f number is a small focal range. The bigger the f number, the bigger your focal range. You can also control aperture on your iPhone, if you didn't know that. If you go into portrait setting on your camera, at the bottom, you just take your finger and move it up, just like that, you will see an F appear. If you click on the F, there's suddenly a scale right here where you can scale your photograph to wide open at f1.6, or you can dial it all the way down to f16. Next, we're going to talk about shutter speed. So you take your control dial and change that over to TV. Remember, there's 2 T's in shutter. T is for TV. That's your shutter. It stands for time value, but I think it's just easier to think of 2 T's in shutter. That's the one you want. The shutter speed is very important, particularly if you're in a low light scenario. You want a really slow shutter speed. You're going to want maybe a tripod and a really wide aperture to match that. The shutter speed controls the blur that you have in your photograph. So if you're at a sporting event where there are fast automobiles, motorcycles, airplanes, whatever, you want to make sure that you have a fast enough shutter speed so that your picture is not blurry. If you're hand holding the photograph, you never want to go below 1/60th of a second. Now, if you have a really fast subject going by and you put the shutter speed at 1/250, you'll still get some blur on that. If it's a super fast car or airplane and you have 1/500th of a second, you're going to get some motion still in the frame of that. If you go to a faster shutter speed of 1/1000, that should freeze up most of the fast action that you're going to see, unless it's extremely fast that you're filming. And then the limit on some of the cameras is 1/4000th of a second. That's as fast as some of the beginner level cameras will shoot. That should stop all of the action. But if you're going to shoot that fast, you need to have a lot of light. So the more light you have, the faster shutter speed you can use. The less light you have, the slower shutter speed you want to use. We have a special treat today. There's a helicopter getting ready to take off. So if you ever wanted to see how the shutter speed can affect the blur of a prop, you need to check out the speed it can stop on the rotor. And there he goes. He's taking off. So he's taking off now, and you can't tell. He's in the air at 1/4000. But if we switch this back down to 1/1000 and then to 1/500th, 1/250, 1/650, and 1/125, then you get some really nice blur on there at 1/125. That was spectacular. That was a lot of shooting so that I could make sure that we get the proper blur in there, running up and down the range from 1/4000th, which that big blade on the helicopter, the rotor, should be stopped or pretty close to stopped. But at the slower speeds, you'll see that that's really blurred. Okay, now the fourth, but certainly not the least thing that we're going to talk about is the ISO. And the ISO used to refer to the old film cameras, and you would buy your film based on the ISO number. This happens to be a roll of 200 that's in here. ISO film was gauged on how much light it would gather quickly. If you wanted to have bright sunlight, you probably wanted 100 speed. If you had very little light and you're shooting weddings, you want to have 800 speed. The ISO is very, very important. With the new mirrorless cameras and DSLRs, the lower the ISO at 100, the better the picture will be as far as grain is concerned or noise. Today, with the mirrorless cameras, we always talk about how much noise is introduced. So as the lighting is very, very bright, you want to have a lower ISO of about 100. If it's a little darker, or if you need a little more speed out of your shutter, you want to move it up to 200. Every time you step up the ISO, it allows you to shoot at a faster shutter speed. Now the mirrorless cameras, they have a tremendous range. Starting out at 100, some of them actually start lower than that, down to 50, which is really, really superior, high quality, high definition, no noise, etc. And they can go up to 30,000 plus. Some of them are over like 50,000. It's kind of ridiculous. So you can dial in these higher numbers in a really low light situation, but you're going to be introducing a lot of noise into the photograph. So remember, as far as ISO is concerned, you want the lowest number possible for your lighting situation. And that will give you the best, clearest quality picture without a lot of noise in it. Most of the time, you want to set that on automatic and just let the camera dictate what the ISO should be, because you want to first concentrate on your shutter speed and your aperture. Whether you want to have a fast moving subject and slow it down with your shutter speed, or if you want to create a really shallow depth of field with your aperture. Remember, we're going to use AV and TV to start with. Leave ISO on auto for now, okay? Composition, aperture, shutter speed, leave the ISO on auto. It's that easy. If you have any questions on anything that we've talked about today, please put them in the comments down below. I'd be glad to go through that. But the principles that we've talked about today with the rule of thirds, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, that has been the standard for photography since Ansel Adams started making his masterpieces. If you don't know who that is, look it up. But he was grandmaster, actually. One of the best photographers of the early era. So the principles of photography, controlling light, controlling blur, and controlling image quality all hinge around the things that we've talked about today. So good luck to you guys. I'm excited for you. You've got your brand new camera, whether it's a interchangeable lens camera, a point and shoot, or even the newest iPhone. Go out there, take a lot of pictures, have fun with it, and we'll see you next time on D2 Destination. Please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.